Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 140 of the Meet the Farmers podcast. I'm your host, Will Evans. Yes, you did hear that right. Still got it, Ben.
Sounds great.
Ben has very kindly asked me to join him today to interview our fellow Kite Podcast team member, the one and only Mr. Chris Walkland.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's so good. Thank you so much for doing this. And I do feel like I'm on rock and roll. It feels like it's come back for one time only.
Are we going to do the 5 cheesy questions at the end as well?
Oh, we could do that. Let's do that. I mean, Chris isn't ready for them, but we could do that.
I'll make some notes now. Chris, start thinking about your favorite all-time song and favorite social media follow and things like that. Anyway. For those of you who don't know him, Chris is an agricultural journalist, commentator, market analyst, and business advisor specializing in the dairy sector. He's one of the few dairy specialists in the UK, and there isn't much he doesn't know when it comes to market trends. On Fridays,
Can I just interrupt there? There isn't much he knows. There isn't much he knows.
On Fridays, he can be found broadcasting his regular and very unique dairy market reports on the Kite Podcast. And anyone who's listened to that podcast will understand what I mean when I say unique. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, Chris, welcome. Let's start at the beginning. So you grew up in North Yorkshire, but you went to school in Newbury and then Bath. Tell us about your time growing up.
Well, my father was a Methodist minister and he died young. So the Methodist Church actually paid for my brother and I to go to boarding school. Mum didn't have any money at all. And if that hadn't happened, we probably would have been split up as a family. So things were pretty tough for my mum in those days. But the Methodist Church paid for us to go to school. I went when I was 9, my brother at 11. So that was 200 miles away from home.
Wow.
And it was pretty daunting at the time.
I've got a 9-year-old daughter, and I can't imagine her having to go to the other side of the country. That must have been huge for both your mum and for you.
Yeah.
Well, it was, but it was also quite fun. I mean, we used to get on the train at Knaresborough and go through Leeds and York when we were like 11. Now, on our own, it would never happen these days. But we would go and we'd get off at King's Cross and mosey along the underground, 2 little lost kids from the town. Wow. But it was pretty good fun, I have to say, looking back. I wouldn't change it.
No. Wow. And like me, you went to the greatest agricultural college / university in the country, Harper Adams. What was that like for you, and what kind of student were you?
Oh, I was an incredibly diligent student.
Of course he was.
I mean, I wasn't one of these people that did all their work at the last minute.
I'll bet.
But I didn't find work particularly easy. I wasn't one of these people that had a brain like a sponge and could mop anything up. So I did have to work pretty hard. But Harper in my day was small. It was a really good place to be. Everybody knew everybody else practically. Yeah. Not like today. I mean, it's enormous now. But we knew everybody. We got on with everybody pretty much. And it was just good fun. A small niche agricultural college as it was then.
Yeah. Have you been back since you left?
Yeah, I've been back a couple of times, but it's barely recognizable now.
Because I know you have well.
Yeah, I went back fairly recently. Yeah, Chris is right. It's feels like a proper university now. Whereas when I was there early, sort of late 90s, early 2000s, it still did have that agricultural college feel, although it was changing then. But
it looks as if they've got clever people there now.
It really does.
Not in my day.
apart from your good self.
Why did you choose Harper, Chris? Where did the sort of agricultural connection come from? Or
well, when we were young, we didn't we couldn't afford holidays. But we had a family friend who had a farm in Norfolk near King's Lynn. So we used to go on holiday quite often to that farm. And they had things called tractors and combines and woolly things.
Yeah.
And a horse. So for me, it was quite exciting and different. And I guess I got an interest in agriculture there, but without knowing it. I also didn't really have I didn't have a father who was a lawyer or a airline pilot to influence me. So there was none of that. But when we went to school, a friend of our father's was an agriculturalist. He was high up in Marks and Spencer's. He was Peel Holroyd, he was. Just died last month. And he knew everybody in agriculture at the time. He was one of the leading lights in the food sector. And he would have influenced me as well.
Yeah.
So I guess the combination of the three things pushed me in this direction because I didn't know what else was out there, really.
Yeah. So where did the journalism come from? Was that something that you picked up at Harper? Did you discover a love for writing, or was that, I don't know, where did it come from?
Well, I knew I could write. And when I was at Harper, I knew what I didn't want to do rather than what I did want to do. And I knew I'd be useless at selling. So I didn't think I'd make a good job of that.
I would think you'd be quite good at selling.
I was going to say, skip ahead of
what
you.
You're basically saying is you're full of bullshit, aren't you? And bullshit and salesmen go together.
I think you could spin a good line.
No, I've got a huge respect for salesmen, but I didn't want to spend all my time in the car going up and down farm drives selling things. And I just fell into journalism by accident, really. Somebody who I knew from my course had done the job. They were moving on. Vacancy became available. So I kind of applied and, got a lucky break.
And you started writing about the pig sector?
I did, yeah. Yeah. But pig farmers were way too miserable for a long-term career in pig farming. Decided to move on to dairy. I mean, pig farmers.
It starts already.
Dairy farmers
miserable when the price is high, and they're miserable when the price is low.
Dairy farmers famously cheerful and optimistic, of course.
Well, probably more optimistic.
I say that from a dairy farming family.
And dairy farmers are mad as well as pig farmers. I think pig farmers are probably even madder than dairy farmers. But
what's the lack of?
Why did I bring you on this podcast? So we've been linked to that. In all seriousness, back then, what was your perception of farmers themselves? Sort of going into that role, and has that changed at all through the years?
Oh, I thought all farmers were rich.
Okay.
I hadn't really and didn't understand the concept of tenant farmers.
Yep.
Because I think the farmers that I'd come across mainly were landowners.
Yep.
And I would have been subject to all of the headlines in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s about subsidies and things like that. And I thought farmers were rich and doing pretty well, and a lot of them probably were. And aside from the tenant farmer element, that would be my perceptions. And how that has changed, well, now I think they're all poor. Landowners and tenants.
Yeah.
And I do admire farmers for what they're up against. What they're up against on a number of factors, not least the weather, politics and economics. And I do remember thinking in one of my Harper Adams economics lectures, why do people do this job?
Yeah. You know what? That is one of the main questions that anyone who certainly hasn't grown up in farming or comes in from a different slightly angle, that is the key question. It's something that
I think even for a lot of us who are brought up in farming,
Yeah.
that's a question. I've been asking myself that a lot lately. When did you start to specialize in dairy then, Chris? Where did that come from?
Well, about 2 or 3 years into writing about pigs and having decided that it was such a grumpy industry, I had the opportunity of moving to write about dairy. This was still at Farming Press in Ipswich. So I took the opportunity and haven't managed to escape yet. I'm still here. And, I quite like it, really.
Why do you like it? What is it that you like about the dairy industry? Here's your chance to big up the dairy farmers.
I think it's a very dynamic industry. There's always something going on, whether that is politics. It's a very political industry, whether that was EU politics or UK politics. There's always something happening on prices. Unlike pig farmers, dairy farmers are always happy with their milk price. They're always content. And there's some great people out there.
Yeah.
There's some great people out there. There's a huge variety of people out there. There are people who think they know everything but actually know nothing. There are people that think they are stupid and actually are really intelligent and bright.
Yeah.
And there's every type of farmer and person in between. And the characters are great.
Yeah.
So there's that element, and it's just there's always something going on.
Yeah. I suppose other than being asked to join the Kite Podcast team, of course, what give us some career highlights.
Well, I think that is the highlight.
It must be. It must be.
That is the undoubted highlight of my career, and actually, hopefully, I'll get a listener one day. I'll do it often enough. Somebody might actually listen. But I don't know. I think career highlights. I do like writing the comment piece for British Dairying on the industry. I have enjoyed working behind the scenes as Robin to Ian Potter's Batman. I've done that for a number of years. So that's been a highlight. It was quite good fun going to the Royal Show and Smithfield meeting, dignitaries and the Queen Mother. And I think travel has been a highlight. In my early career, I had the opportunity of flying to the Philippines.
Wow.
And that was good fun.
Yeah.
And I've done a lot of countries that I wouldn't have been to if it wasn't for this job. But I think the highlight are the stories that you hear and the people that you come across.
When did you first decide to head out on your own and go freelance? And what prompted that decision?
Well, I had moved on from writing magazines at Farming Press, and I was working in a PR agency. Basically had a bust up and got fired. It was simple as that.
I wish I'd been a fly on the wall for that.
Yeah, it wasn't a particularly easiest time, but I was I was obviously doing stuff that they didn't approve of, but the clients were loving what I was doing. British Dairying was the editor of British Dairying was struggling, so I was helping her out and stuff like that. And occasionally PR agencies implode, don't they? And that's what happened with that one. And I started up on my own and never really looked back.
Yeah.
Best thing that ever happened to me in hindsight.
Yeah. Anyone who goes to the CMAX conference will, of course, know you for your rather unique style, your jackets. When did you start? Let's just say, when did you start your flamboyant dress sense?
Well, I was asked to do the CMAX conference, which was a huge privilege. And I was going to be talking about cheese and butter, so I thought I'd dress like a lump of cheese. So I put a light yellow jacket on. And the next year, and I was also talking about price movements, and I like to use colors, red for negative, green for positive, yellow for neither now nor summer. So I thought, the following year I was asked to do it again. Obviously, no one listened the first year, so they thought they'd have me back. So I had red and green jackets as well, and did a swap. And what I've subsequently found out is that nobody listens to what I say, but they do remember what I wear. That will be on my epitaph. But on a serious note, I think that you can't educate people, you can't explain things to people if they're not listening. And if you entertain them, they're more likely to listen. So that's another reason why I decided to do it. And now it's a real talking point for the conference. Not what Walkland's going to say, but what's he going to wear
every time.
I think that's a really interesting point there, actually, because I guess all of us on this call are in some degree or another involved in communications to varying degrees. And I've sort of done a few things where I've spoken to groups of young people in farming, and I always do tell them to make sure you are totally yourself and let your own personality come out. Don't sort of do things very prescriptively or toe the line and do things as you should. Make sure you do it as you, and I think you are a really good example of that. That you are relentlessly yourself, and I think that's why people enjoy reading your reports and listening to the Kite podcast. Actually, I'm not trying to embarrass you there, but I think you're a really good example of that.
Well, I think you have to try. You have to be yourself, and one of the things I remember from my career is when I moved from journalism into PR, I had a feeling that PR was changing. Right, public relations and writing was changing. I didn't know how it was changing. I just had a funny feeling that it was. And what I think happened is, with that attitude in mind, I actually changed the way that I did it.
Okay.
I actually changed the way that people wanted their messages to be portrayed. And it worked, and it worked for me. Obviously, it didn't work for the PR agency, but it worked for me. It worked for the client. So I think if you have a conviction inside of you that you think something is going to happen, then believe in it. And before you know it, you've actually made the change that you think's going to come without you necessarily knowing in what direction or when or how.
No, completely. Janet
Does that
Hughes.
make sense?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Janet Hughes said something very similar actually a couple of episodes ago, in that, especially coming into the farming industry, and she was saying as a northerner, but she said it was incredibly refreshing actually coming into the industry within a community who call a spade, say it how it is, and if there are massive issues, then actually engage with them directly. But at the same time, going back to what you were saying earlier, Chris, this perception of this veneer on top of an idea of what the sector actually is, what farming and agriculture is from a public perception, is perhaps completely different to how we see it ourselves. And that for me is still one of the key challenges in our communications is how you tackle that dichotomy between the two. And I don't know whether you had an idea about that, or
I don't understand. I don't think how the townies view farmers in the countryside. We were talking about that on the Kite.
Yeah, I was going to say last week,
weren't we? And I'm just not sure anymore, because I think the general media as a whole and the number of vested interests that are out there now, I just think it blurs everything. I mean, if you listen to the vested interests out there, you just don't know which way up is up.
Listeners who don't listen to the Kite podcast, I'm sure
That's all of them.
I'm sure they're in a...
they all do.
Numbers are going up, aren't they?
Mine
they won't have had the pleasure of hearing your milk market reports, possibly. They might be wondering, though, what a dairy market analyst does day to day. Can you describe the process of putting together one of those reports?
Yeah, well, I get up, early in the morning, about 11. Like all journalists do, and then just start plucking figures out the air and sticking them in a spreadsheet.
That's what I thought, to be honest.
Yeah.
And everybody believes them.
Mm.
No, seriously, I track a lot of different sources of numbers all over the world, really, on milk volume, on prices, on views and opinions, and basically chuck them into a computer and lots of different spreadsheets and chew over the results that come back with one objective in mind. And that objective is to try and digest all of that in a format that allows farmers to get a view of where their milk price might be in 6 months. They know where it's going to be in 2 months, but what about 6 months or 7 months? And if you wind the clock back, I remember several years ago that I wasn't doing what I was doing now. And dairy farmers were misled by what was being published and what was being said into spending quite a lot of money on kit and materials on the back of what they thought would be a good milk price in 3 or 6 months' time. And in actual fact, a terrible milk price came along.
Okay. Yep.
And they were left high and dry.
Yeah.
And at that time, the rhetoric in the industry was, we only want to know the good news, don't tell us the bad news. So people didn't tell them that the milk price was going to crash in 6 months' time because the farmers didn't want to know that. So what happened is they went out and spent a load of money and the milk price crashed.
Yeah.
So now I don't really care if people say, oh, you're doom and gloom, you're talking the job down, blah, 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 because farmers are better off knowing what's coming than not. And if I take a bit of flack on being doom and gloomy, at least I can hold my head up on a night, and tell them and know that I've told the truth.
Farming's a long-term game, isn't it? And we're going through a key time of ag policy reform at the moment, maybe the biggest period of ag policy reform in our lifetimes. Where do you think we're heading to at the moment in terms of how politicians get involved in the farming world?
Oh, well, I think our politicians are have been stupid, ignorant, reckless, and damn right bloody dangerous, if you ask me.
Yeah, reckless is the word, isn't it?
And if we're not careful, they will not just lead farming down the river, they'll lead it to the bottom of the river. And I think it's the ability and resilience of farmers that will prevent that happening. I do live in faith that the cretins that we've got in play at the moment will soon be replaced by other people that know what they're doing, because they're just abysmal. But working with in the pig industry, I saw the stall and tether ban come in, and there were all of the warnings from the pig farmers and the pig industry about exporting our industry on the back of a unilateral stall and tether ban. But still the politicians went ahead and made unilateral decisions that screwed the industry. I cut my teeth in the dairy industry on deregulation of the MMB. I mean, what a cock-up.
Yeah.
I mean, that wasn't just a political cock-up, that was a cock-up on all sides. But even so, the politicians got that one wrong as well.
That was the beginning of the end for dairy on our farm here.
Yeah. But I'm very optimistic that sense will prevail one day. Sense with the politicians, sense with the public on climate change. And sense with the media. I mean, the media have no idea on farming, do they?
No.
They really don't. I mean, you take all this vegetable stuff. I mean, vegetables are great to eat, aren't they?
Well,
we all need to eat more vegetables. Fan-bloody-tastic. Let's eat more vegetables. Who's going to grow the damn things?
Yeah. And where?
And where? Let's take where. Okay, so it's going to be in the east. It's not going to be on top of Snowdon. It's a very, very skilled job.
Yeah.
To me, a normal tractor looks scarily expensive. And then you see these veg growers with their huge pieces of kit behind them, normally full of people that you can't get anymore.
Well, exactly.
We got to grow more veg. Who?
Yeah.
Where?
Yeah.
How?
Make a massive statement and then not actually think about the how.
Yeah.
And then you read a tweet that I read last night that knocked me over practically, when somebody, and I can't remember the name, posted about the price of a whole chicken being less than the price of a medium latte.
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you think, wow,
Yeah.
knock me down with a feather.
Yeah.
So where's the joined up thinking going to come?
Yeah.
And Minette Batters is repeatedly saying that the government isn't listening. Now, if people aren't listening to Minette,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm scared of Minette. I'd listen to her. But people aren't listening to Minette, one of the greatest ag leaders we've had for many years.
Yeah.
If we get somebody lesser than Minette, we've got a chance.
Yeah. It's a good point. Can you think of any examples through the years of any politicians involved in or connected with farming who've actually done a good job?
Oh gosh, how long have you got? I mean, there will be some. I think one of the problems that agriculture has is the number of ministers that we've had.
Yeah,
I'm just
certainly in
go
recent
on.
years.
Like,
It's like an underperforming football club, isn't it? Chopping and
Yeah.
changing the managers.
yeah,
Yeah.
now
It's like Everton.
This is
Yeah.
this is. I've got a slide up just out of accident. Really, we had 4 in 6 years between 2010 and 2016.
Okay.
Right, how many have we had since 2016? I don't know. Another 3, another 4.
Must be. Gove's been since 2016. Obviously Eustace.
I can't think of her name. There was
Liz Truss, but I can't remember when she was.
Yeah, she was 2014 to 2016.
Gosh,
Then
she was that long
Ledson.
ago. Wow.
They were both complete disasters.
Oh, Andrea
Owen
Ledson.
Patterson. Oh yeah, whatever happened to Owen Patterson?
Yeah,
he was
Patterson.
there. Caroline Spellman. But if you go through DEFRA's track record, I mean, there was the farm payments fiasco, there was the IT disaster, foot and mouth was a fiasco, the badger culls just awful. What else springs to mind? Oh, they managed to cock up flood relief.
Have you got the same
Cameron
perception?
Cameron had to do a U-turn on Forest. And my favorite of all time is this one. DEFRA scientists trying to find out whether the national sheep flock is infected with BSE have spent the past 4 years testing the brains of cows instead. Now,
oh my.
These are just some of the DEFRA cock-ups that we've had. And the leadership has been dreadful. And one of the reasons leadership has been dreadful is because if you've got a minister in charge every 2 years, a different one, then it's going to be bad. If you were a PLC company and you changed your chairman and you changed your MD every 2 years, like agriculture changes its minister, then you're going to have a share price on the floor and nobody's going to have any confidence in you.
Just while you're here as well, Will, is this a similar picture over in Cardiff?
I don't know, because I often my views, probably political views, are probably quite different than a lot of farmers.
Yeah, but the general
I
sense you get from Welsh farmers in terms of their perception of Cardiff.
I mean, there's a lot of frustration, obviously, with TB. That's the big one. But I think, I mean, I know Leslie Griffiths reasonably well because she only lives up the road, and I like her. I think she's been out to our farm a few times, and she listens to. I think she's keen to listen to farmers. I mean, whether that actually translates to action.
She certainly spoke well at Oxford.
She did, and very good response, actually. And we actually was quite interested. There's a lot of English farmers, I think, were quite impressed with how she spoke, and Edwin Poots, Northern Ireland Ag Minister. I think, you know, like the rest of us, we're all pretty frustrated with government, but and the speed they operate. But I would suggest that we're perhaps a little bit better served in Cardiff in that department than you are in England.
Yeah. Anyway, before we do Will's quick questions, we're going to do the final two questions that are normally on this show to you, Chris. The first is, if you have a message for the public, any message, what would it be?
Message to the public. Have confidence in farmers and the food they produce.
Grand. Nice and quick to the point. And finally, and this will be an interesting one, a message from Chris Walkland to farmers.
Have confidence in your own ability to thrive and survive.
Right. Over to you.
Oh, and listen to my podcast.
Oh, of course. Yeah, let's get that in there.
Going away from farming then, and this was a question I always used to ask, and I deliberately used to ask farmers this question actually at the end of my podcast, just going back to something we said earlier, is that I was trying to show non-farmers listening that farmers are human and do have things like favorite songs. So on this, so what is your all-time favorite song, Chris?
It would have to be one from when I was at prep school.
Okay.
Probably, because going there at 9 and hiding radios in cupboards and under the pillows because they were all banned, and listening to Radio Caroline. It would have to be from that era, but I wouldn't be able to pick one, I don't think. Probably Stairway to Heaven or Freebird or something like that.
Yeah.
Oh, I love a bit of Leonard Skinner's
good.
Freebird. Classic. Okay, and then the other one I always used to ask, just for fun really, but what's your favorite agriculture related social media account to follow? Who do you think does a good job? I think you're supposed to say Becky Leach here, I think.
Well, I'm obviously in love with Becky. I wouldn't be able to answer that one, I don't think. I do admire a lot of farmers who have the time and put the effort into communicating with the general public via Twitter, and a lot of books are being written, and I take my hat off to them because I wouldn't have the time or the inclination to do it. I think I'd choose Joe Stanley.
Joe is on the list. I think we'll call it a day there, but thank you so much, Chris, for coming on. It's been seeing you week in, week out on the Kite Podcast. It was nice to hear a little bit more about your story, and thank you also to Will for coming on to co-host today. That was a real pleasure. Next week, I was just
going to say, it's a shame my mother's not alive to listen to it. Really, at least you get one message on my life story.
Next week, because clearly I'm still looking for guests, I'll be speaking to our co-boss, senior consultant at Kite Consulting and the producer of the Kite Podcast, Becky Leach. I hope you can join me then, but until then, have a great week. Let's turn to the podcast for a bit, and listeners, please do go and check out the Kite Podcast. It's a little bit different, which for an industry podcast. But yeah, please go and check that out. From your point of view, Becky, we were both involved from the beginning of this, but why did Kite think it was a good idea to make a specialist dairy podcast? Because I can remember when John first gauged the idea with me.
Yeah. I think your listeners are probably pre-warned. If you had Chris on last week, then
Chris was on really good behaviour last week.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, really good.
Well, listeners, if you do come over to the Kite Podcast, don't expect him to always be on good behaviour. It's like trying to shepherd a cat.